Right, hey guys, how we doing? We are back on another video from Broken Ronin. Today we're going to be checking out the complete guide to defeating Sukuna, which is interesting because chapter 257, I feel like we're on the way. I feel like we're on the way to actually beating him. The whole Yuji dropping how many bloody black flashes in a row, and all the learning of him being like potentially related to Sukuna and that, it's like whoa. So I think the manga's gonna get there very soon, but let's see how Broken Ronin feels like the approach should be with this complete guide.
It's no secret that Sukuna is strong.
Like, yeah, he's ridiculous.
Really strong. Strong enough to defeat Gojo, strong enough to learn from that fight, and strong enough to absolutely tear through numerous special grade level combatants immediately following the most exhilarating and difficult battle of his life. And because of this strength, defeating Sukuna seems like a near impossibility. So today, I'm instating myself as a faculty member of Jujutsu High, because it's time to give you all the beginner's guide to defeating Ryomen Sukuna, Jujutsu Kaisen's strongest. The point of this guide is pretty simple. By using a mix of hindsight, creativity, and a perspective not limited to the character's own imagination, I'll be crafting multiple different strategies and plans that would assuredly lead to the defeat of Sukuna.
Assuredly, right, okay.
In essence, I am breaking down how I would go about taking down the king, with the pieces allotted to me during the time skip. What I consider a total victory in this instance is any situation in which Sukuna is defeated and Megami's soul can be saved. Just
okay, love that.
because it's quite obvious that the main goal of the protagonist here is to not only kill Sukuna, but save Megami as well. To start, I'll be focusing explicitly on the sorcerers left after Gojo's death. Following Sukuna's development of the World Dismantle, how exactly could I deploy the heavy hitters and supporting allies to take down this massive threat? And at the end of the video, I'll be going over what I like to consider a bit of a cheat code for a scenario like this. If I was to give Gojo all of the knowledge of how his battle with Sukuna actually played out, could I construct a situation in which he's able to defeat Sukuna even with Mahoraga in tow? Before we get to that, however, first, let's see how Satoru's students and the next generation of sorcerers would cope with the overwhelming force that is the King of Curses. The first plan of action that I'd be likely to discuss with all sorcerers involved hinges pretty strongly in Higuruma's domain and Kusakabe existing as a main point of attack. Just as was the case in the canon actually, I still think the best scenario for everyone is Sukuna getting cut by the Executioner's blade.
Yeah, that would have, like, if that landed, that would have just been like, boom, done.
Allowing Megami to be freed and Sukuna to be defeated simultaneously. The reason the plan fell through in Jujutsu Kaisen is multifaceted, but a massive contributor to that is actually Yuta Okotsu. As is implied by Yuta's internal monologue, at some point in the planning process, he was meant to accompany Yuji and Higuruma in the fight against Sukuna. In my plan, it's absolutely critical that I make sure Yuta forgoes his feud with Kenjaku and appears on the battlefield the instant Kashimo is defeated and Higuruma enters the ring.
Right, so we can get there as soon as possible.
Instead, Maki will go to kill Kenjaku since she won't be required to fight in this specific scenario unless things take a turn for the absolute worst.
Alright, yeah, I like this. Cool. Yeah, because Maki could have, easily dealt with that.
Maki doesn't have the same crowd controlling ability as Yuta does with Rika at his disposal, so more civilians may be in danger in the short term, but Yuta himself determines that all of his prior reasoning for personally killing Kenjaku just acted as an excuse for his grudge, which means Maki should be able to do a good enough job for everyone involved to be okay with the outcome. With Weebi's teleportation as an option as well, she should be able to reach the colony that Kenjaku is in, kill him, handle the rampaging cursed spirits, and get back as a backup option just in case. Focusing back on Sukuna specifically though, the plan would go as such. Mei uses her bird strike from afar to act as covering fire for Yuji, Yuta, and Higuruma, and the moment an opening does appear, Higuruma needs to open his domain and confiscate Kamutoke.
Yep.
In the best case scenario, I would have Rika make an attempt to rip the cursed tool from him the instant they enter his range, but this ploy would likely be obvious enough for Sukuna to see through it, and it'd just be safer to have Higuruma's domain do its thing, its naturally tool, as well as allow him to obtain the Executioner's blade. The clarity that I have via me being a manga reader would allow me to inform the characters that the tool would be taken instead of the curse technique, so Sukuna's initial flashes wouldn't catch everyone off guard and keep
Yeah, they'd be prepared for it, right? Okay.
them from taking a little bit extra damage that they did at the start. In contrast to what actually happened, from this point onwards, things start to significantly diverge, as rather than having Higuruma wield the Executioner's Blade in an attempt to kill Sukuna then and there, Yuta would immediately follow the closing of Higuruma's barrier with one of his own, trapping Sukuna in there with just him and Itadori. Yuta would then use his ability to shift the coordinates of the barrier to move away from Higuruma, Ino, Choso, and Kusakabe. And from there, Yuji and Yuta would do what they do and start fighting Sukuna within the confines of Yuta's authentic and mutual love. The curse techniques at Yuta's disposal, plus Rika and Yuji packing on the damage, would lead to a very similar conclusion that we got in chapters 250 and 251. In this instance though, Yuji and Yuta would have knowledge on Megami's mental state and be more properly prepared for Sukuna's desperate counter slash. In all honesty, I'm not sure that there would be a way to properly counter it considering how amped it had to be from the chanting binding vow, which means that Yuta has to go into this fight specifically with the knowledge that he might be bisected. It's possible that if he collects all of his cursed energy on the targeted area, he can avoid a lethal amount of damage, similar to Todo blocking Mahito's Black Flash, or potentially even make a Hikari-like binding vow at the last moment, but that's only in the best case scenario. And as I'm sure you've noticed, the past 20 or so chapters haven't really been chock full of best case scenarios for our protagonist, so I won't be betting on it. If you do think knowledge of this attack and its placement would allow Yuta to stay in this fight for longer, he and Yuji just continue to attack him and keep lowering his battle power in preparation for the second phase of this plan. In the event the slash is still too much for him, however, I'd have Yuta break apart his own domain in order to leave an opening for the next wave of fighters, and at this point we come to a bit of a crossroads. In scenario A, Maki was able to kill Kenjaku without trouble and eliminate all of the cursed spirits quickly enough to make it back in time to be here for the sneak attack. In scenario B, Maki was held up at some point in the plan and isn't fast enough to make it back in time for the post-domain sneak. In scenario A, we just give Maki the Executioner's Blade instead of Soul Split Katana and have her stab him in the back, immediately getting us a victory. This is, once again, the best case scenario, and one that I think is relatively feasible on our end. At the bare minimum, Maki should be physically comparable to base Yuta at this point in the story, and due to her invisibility, it's even more likely that she'll catch Kenjaku off guard.
Yeah, like, well, he says invisibility. They can't sense it, can they? Yeah, you know. But she can also go through domain, so he doesn't really need to drop the domain for it to enter. But
And with Soul Split Katana's extra lethality, it's pretty certain that Kenjaku will not be surviving an encounter with Maki, especially with Takaba acting as cover. The only way I see her getting held up is if all of the curses rampage omnidirectionally, and she has to exercise them all individually in a way that takes up too much time. In this case, I'm inclined to tell Maki to forego the casualties that will arise from that cursed spirit rampage, but keeping in line with the morality of everyone present, that just isn't all that plausible. So Maki will just have to be held up in the curse extermination. If all of these things occur in the absolute worst way possible, we get into scenario B, which relies on Kusakabe getting Executioner's Blade and killing Sukuna off himself. Once again, Higuruma cannot be anywhere near the danger zone, because as long as he's alive and unencumbered, we can keep the Executioner's Blade in play and continue to have the insta-kill option that we
because we've seen that he doesn't have to be the one wielding it as well, because Yuji nearly got him with it, didn't he?
Desperately need in this fight. This is where Kusakabe would come in and have to face the music. Now, Choso and Ino could potentially provide long-range covering fire to attract Sukuna's attention, but once he notices that blade in Kusakabe's hand, the real challenge begins, as it seems that Sukuna was pretty obsessed with Higuruma's curse technique and the applications of the sword that is spawned because of it. If it wasn't clear already though, Kusakabe standing off against Sukuna alone in this context isn't my first choice, mainly because in this universe he isn't as weakened as the one Kusakabe actually fights him in the actual manga. For starters, he doesn't have the heart wound that Maki gave him that was very obviously slowing him down, which is a problem in itself. Sure, Jacob's Ladder combined with multiple uses of RCT, slashes, and soul damage sustained from Yuji make this Sukuna significantly weaker than how he starts in this fight, but it's still quite a lot to ask of Kusakabe, especially if all of Sukuna's attention and ire is placed upon him. His only saving grace in this scenario would be that Sukuna hasn't landed a Black Flash, and thus isn't really feeling in the zone. So the chances of one stray sword slash connecting isn't zero, and I honestly think that Kusakabe's chances are higher than you'd initially think. This last leg of the strategy really relies on Sukuna not being prepared for the level of speed Kusakabe has when deploying his automatic long-range simple domain in the same way he did in the manga. In response to this, you might be inclined to say that he's quicker now due to a lack of heart injury, and while that's true and honestly a fine point, Kusakabe's skill mixed with the surprise factor of the context led to Sukuna getting slashed over a dozen times in the canon storyline. But in this one, we only need an individual slash. If Sukuna gets cut by any one of those attacks, the fight is over. Wow. And we win. The attack does not need to be deep, and it does not need to be repeated, and based on the conditions I set, I genuinely think it's a possibility. If Kusakabe on his own isn't enough to convince you, however, there are some additional pieces you could add to the board to increase his chances and likelihood of surviving. Let's say you have Wee teleport Urahime to the battlefield while Yuta and Yuji are fighting within the domain. This way, she has the time to go through her entire ritual, and Kusakabe is going into the fight with an increased amount of cursed energy and output to circumvent the lack of damage Sukuna's taken. While we don't have an exact measurement on how much the hard stab took from him, Kusakabe being 80% stronger due to cursed energy and cursed energy output increase isn't anything to laugh at and would only boost our chances of victory. Hell, I might even have Larue enter the fray a bit earlier to grab Sukuna one time in order to prepare for an eventual cutie honey usage that would be absolutely clutch in this situation. Honestly though, the strategy lives on so long as Higuruma doesn't die or take so much damage he loses control over his curse technique. Once that happened in the manga, our force's chances of winning plummeted because we essentially lost what was our get out of jail free card. Even in the event that Kusakabe is defeated, which is one that I don't necessarily think is super likely, one use of a technique halting domain amplification from Higuruma can make it seem as if his technique has dissipated, only to allow Maki to wield the blade upon her arrival. In any case, I have quite a bit of confidence in this strategy, even though things constantly don't go our way. The only real scenario in which this would go poorly is if, for some reason, Sukuna had enough cursed energy and output in the tank to pull out an immediate fire arrow and blow the whole spot up. But not only is that just unlikely based on the amount of damage he's taken up to this point, but it also simply isn't in character, at least based on what we've seen from Sukuna thus far.
Yeah. Strategy number 2.
Strategy number 2 still hinges on Higuruma and his curse technique. As was made clear by the story, that ability is the most convenient way to deal with Sukuna and save Megami at the same time.
Yeah, the convenience is definitely the word here, isn't it? It's like, let's just do this as simple as possible. This guy's got an instant kill move. Let's use it.
There are plenty of potential methods that would end up killing Sukuna that don't clear the other condition, so unfortunately our options in this specific context are quite limited. The blade in Higgy's domain will be necessary once more, but for argument's sake, let's say that he isn't capable of giving the blade over to someone else for extended periods of time without the sword dissipating. Sure, we have seen him give the blade to Yuji, which does imply some confidence in its staying power, but it disappears after one swipe, so the specific conditions, requirements, and limitations are just unknown factors.
That's a very valid point. Okay, so if you swap it over to someone, they only get one chance with it.
Factors that I don't want to hinge the entire premise of this video on. So to absolutely ensure nothing goes sideways, we'll stick with what we know and have Higuruma be the one to deal the final attack. The problem that arises from this are pretty simple relative to the first strategy though. Compared to Kusakabe, or honestly, compared to any of our close quarter specialists, Higuruma is extremely weak and incapable as a fighter, at least when talking about physicality specifically. While his talent is vast and his technique useful, there is a long list of characters I'd like to have my back in a physical confrontation before I pick Higuruma, which definitely puts us at quite the disadvantage if he needs to be the one to sink the blade into Sukuna's flesh. In order to guarantee that Higuruma will have enough time to land this attack on Sukuna, we will either need to completely immobilize him for a brief period of time, or significantly weaken him beyond anything that in the canon storyline Higuruma ever encounters, or combine the best of both worlds and mix the immobilization and the weakening of Sukuna. To achieve this desired outcome, we'll have to get real creative with how we structure this plan, and honestly, to pull a page out of Akari's book, we might need to take a gamble. Speaking of Hikari, he'll still be on Arame duty just as he would be in the first scenario and in the actual story. Yuta will be on Kenjaku duty, Kashimo will be doing what Kashimo does, and Higuruma and Yuji will be dropping down immediately following his defeat to open the domain expansion. Maki's role, however, changes quite a bit with this second strat. The moment that Gojo dies, just like Kashimo, she needs to be jumping onto the battlefield, not to fight Sukuna, but rather to prevent Kamutoke from entering his grasp. Now, in the canon storyline, a strategy like this is impossible for multiple reasons. The shock of Gojo's death dulling reactions and lack of information on Kamutoke and how it interacts with Higuruma's domain specifically is what limits the characters from thinking of or conceiving of a plan like this. But with the information gained from my manga reading experience, sending Maki to intercept Arame's gift for Sukuna is a small, relatively safe act that'll go a long way for the course of this battle. Maki's also really the only person who could pull something like this off, considering her ability to use air as a platform. The only other person or creature capable of getting high enough quickly enough would maybe be Rika, but considering that Yuta is still on Kenjaku duty in this specific scenario, she is also a non-factor. Heights that no other sorcerer could comfortably reach shouldn't be an issue for her, so aiming for the moment the cursed tool is in view would be her best bet. Now, in all honesty, I don't think Sukuna would have time to retaliate considering Maki's lack of presence on the battlefield as well as her immense speed, but even if he does, in the form that he would be in, he wouldn't be capable of sending out world dismantles, and his base output would be so low that I doubt he would even be able to incapacitate or severely injure Maki in the first place. And any damage that she does take during the retrieval mission is an extremely small price to pay in the grand scheme of things here. The impact of losing this cursed tool before it's even in his grasp and her own personal healing factor make it the obvious play for someone with Maki's set of talents and the information that we now have on the story. After this, it'd be wise to have Maki leave the battlefield via wee teleportation just so that Kamutoke does not re-enter Sukuna's possession. Following this, Kashimo can force Sukuna in his true form just as he does in the canon story, and then we deploy Yuji and Higuruma as normal, this time with the ability to actually seal Sukuna's curse technique. With Kamutoke no longer in his possession, the only thing that could be confiscated would be Dismantle and Cleave, putting every ally of ours in a significant...
Oh, I see, yeah, because it initially takes the tool, so because the tool's not there. Right.
Better position than before. In fact, if Sukuna's technique was actually taken off the table completely, Yuji, Maki, Yuta, and Rika are basically guaranteed to be able to tank or at least survive anything that a techniqueless Sukuna is able to do. That is, unless he lands a Black Flash. That would be a very bad scenario, but even with that happening, I don't see Sukuna being able to overwhelm them. We see that Maki is able to recover from a Black Flash within the span of maybe 1.5 chapters worth of fighting, and Yuji probably would be durable enough as well. Rika can keep regenerating from whatever attacks that she seems to be getting hit with, and I honestly don't doubt that Yuta's reverse curse technique is capable and powerful enough to heal him from whatever damage that would be sustained in that one attack, especially considering LaRue was able to survive a Black Flash and still use their curse technique. At this point, I would allow Higuruma to stay on the battlefield exclusively in the back, looking for openings to strike and immediately dashing out of range if he senses danger. The main contenders until Yuta comes back would be Yuji and Kusakabe, who are there primarily to stall until Akotsu's returned. While fighting without Yuta would definitely be tough for Itadori, and Kusakabe might not even be inclined to be as aggressive as I may want him to be, I think without the curse technique, Sukuna would lack the immediate stopping power necessary to kill any of the main heavy hitters before Yuta shows up. And once Yuta returns, authentic and mutual love is getting expanded, half of Sukuna's arms are being preoccupied, and honestly, I think I would bet everything on this final stand. In the actual story, it makes sense that Maki exists as a contingency plan in case Yuta dies, but in this universe, I think it's better to put all of our chips on the table. Yuji, Choso, Higuruma, Kusakabe, Ino, Maki, Yuta. Everybody's gotta pitch in because this is the perfect time to attack. All hands need to be on deck here. I'd even have Yuta put on the ring and start the 5-minute timer, just so our chances of beating Sukuna right here and now are at their peak. If I could, even Miguel and LaRue would be recruited to jump in the domain here, just so that we're really able to put the pressure on Sukuna, and so that we can capitalize on his technique not being available, and Higuruma being able to keep his technique expanded for as long as possible. In the event Maki's contradictory existence gets Sukuna hype enough to hit a Black Flash, that would definitely prolong the battle and add a bit of strain to the plan, but no matter how much his cursed energy output rises, with no curse technique to channel it through and inability to use a domain as a result, this will just make wearing Sukuna down more of a war of attrition. In his own words, Sukuna determines that the only way to fully put Yuta and Yuji down at the point of their domain expansion would be to hit them with a World Dismantle or Cleave, similar to how he did with Ishigori. At that point, even a regular dismantle wouldn't be enough to kill them, and considering how potent that curse technique is relative to his regular punching and kicking attacks, I genuinely find it unlikely that Sukuna will be putting any of these sorcerers down quicker than they can do the reverse. On top of this, if Yuta and Yuji within the domain already weren't fearful of Sukuna's lower output slashes, them being erased altogether would give them the confidence necessary to get in close and start going to work. With no slashing attacks to worry about, Soul Punch is progressively making Sukuna weaker, Maki Soul attacks chipping away at his output and forcing him to heal, and half of his arms being preoccupied with Hollow Wicker Basket, it's almost guaranteed that at some point Higuruma would find enough space to create an opening. Before he attacks though, I'd have Yuta and Maki start hacking away at his arms, and whatever is remaining would be restrained by Yuji and Rika, while Yuta unleashes Jacob's Ladder on him, weakening his control over Megami even more, and causing a momentary stillness. In this brief overlap of instability and weakness, Higuruma would be immediately thrust to the front lines, stabbing Sukuna with the Executioner's Blade and defeating the King of Curses once and for all. If Higuruma is the guy we need to finish everything off, I genuinely think this is our best bet. The biggest gamble, in all honesty, would be Maki's snatching up of Kamutoke, but with her speed, invisibility, and her dedication, I trust that we would be able to secure it. The absolute worst case scenario would require her to use force against Sukuna to get it from him and continue everything else as planned, but I honestly haven't seen anything from that specific weakened version of Sukuna that would lead me to believe that she couldn't retrieve Kamutoke and the hand that he's holding it in if need be. I'd hope that it doesn't come to that, considering that it'll probably piss Kashimo off, but if that's what must be done in order to lead to a true technique confiscation from Higuruma, then a pissed off Kashimo is just a risk we'll have to incur.
A new foe has appeared.
Now, as I've established over the past 20 minutes, Sukuna can confidently be dealt with if Gojo's efforts against him remain the same, and I am here to plan out the next movements of the next generation of sorcerers. But now it's time to ask a very important and very interesting question. If Gojo had prior knowledge of Sukuna's schemes and plots, as well as my plans to assist and optimize his movements, would the need for his students to even face off against Sukuna ever arise? When considering how I would plan a Gojo victory, a list of information to relay is extremely important. The most impactful event that must be changed in order for Gojo to win is the domain clash. While he was able to adapt after having his barrier shattered a few times, it's evident that pushing his brain to the limit more than Sukuna led to his barrier being disabled. If we're able to lessen the amount of domains Gojo opens, we'll be able to simultaneously handicap Maharaga's background adaptation and keep Gojo's brain fresh throughout the entirety of the battle. The way to do this is painfully simple. You just gotta let Gojo know that Sukuna has an open barrier domain. The next piece of information that would have a major effect on the outcome of this fight would be the awareness that Sukuna will eventually develop the World Slash, specifically after Maharaga is able to adapt and throw long distance slashing attacks himself. Well, in my optimal scenario, the fight never gets this far. In the event that it does, Gojo knowing about this technique application and being on guard for it could definitely save his life. The third and final thing Gojo must account for is Maharaga's adaptation, which seems really obvious considering that Sukuna is currently occupying Megami's body for the entire duration of the fight, but Gojo really needs to keep an eye on Maharaga's adaptation that goes on in the background. His lack of knowledge about that particular usage of the technique leaves him open to having his domain adapted to in a way that is a bit tricky later on in the fight. With all of the necessary information downloaded and my controller plugged in though, here's how I have Gojo go about beating Sukuna. For starters, he's going into the fight knowing about Sukuna's open barrier domain, and as such, has his own shrinking tactic on standby. Even if Satoru wouldn't come to this conclusion on his own during the 1 month time skip, I'm telling him exactly what he needs to do, and considering his level of talent, I don't think that figuring it out over the course of an entire month will be a problem for him. With this in mind, the first major change in Gojo's performance starts with the first clash. Rather than have his domain shattered from the outside with no resistance, Gojo will be able to meet Sukuna at his level and deal out enough damage in the 3 minutes his barrier would hold up to simultaneously break down both of their barriers and start each sorcerer from zero. Now, as crazy as this may sound, depending on your interpretation of Sukuna's kit up to this point, Gojo has a genuine shot at killing him here. The reason for this is, once again, really simple. We know for a fact Gojo can heal his curse technique at this point, but we don't know with the same certainty that Sukuna can or could in the manga. Despite Sukuna healing his technique as well later in the fight, due to Angel's mention of Sukuna's proclivity for picking up tricks, it's entirely possible he developed the skill only after Gojo showed it to him, which would be too little, too late if both of their domains broke down at the same time and reset their ability to activate curse techniques. Healing his technique slower than Gojo means he regains his domain slower than him. Regaining his domain slower means being caught in Infinite Void. Being caught in Infinite Void this early into the fight means that Mahoraga hasn't had enough chance encounters to adapt, and in this scenario, Gojo can just tear Sukuna limb from limb in the way that he intended. Granted, all of this is only a possibility because it is feasible that Sukuna already had the capacity to heal his technique, but like I said, depending on your interpretation, all it would take is one domain clash for Gojo to become the victor. If Sukuna already has this ability though, they would just keep clashing and healing until what happens in the manga initially occurs again. Gojo's superiority in close quarters combat would cause Sukuna to fall a step behind, just enough of an opening for Gojo to deploy Infinite Void and catch him lacking. In the main story, this happens after Gojo and Sukuna clash for 3 minutes twice. Following the same logic here would dictate that Gojo now would only have to open his domain a total of 2 times and heal his technique only once. Once again, this puts Sukuna in a position where he can't use Mahoraga due to not enough instances of contact being initiated. An Infinite Void would allow him to absolutely destroy Sukuna's brain and body. Even if Mahoraga, for some odd reason, can adapt and destroy the domain faster than he did in the manga, Sukuna's mind would still be a wreck from the effects of Infinite Void, but Gojo would be in a good enough state to open a domain another 2 times at least. This would allow Gojo to cast another domain, one-shot Mahoraga with red, and then follow up by demolishing Sukuna while he's frozen by the effects of Infinite Void. This was the optimal scenario that Gojo was aiming for. In fact, in chapter 230, he straight up says that this was his plan. The only flaw is that he underestimated the effect of the brain damage. But here, Gojo wouldn't have spanned the ability as much, leaving Sukuna as the only person incapable of expanding their domain. If he decides to counter Gojo's Infinite Void with Hollow Wicker Basket, the problem still arises that he's facing Gojo with both of his hands protecting him from immediately being brain blasted, and having to attempt to fight a special grade amongst special grades with just his feet and no curse techniques. Transforming into his true form would allow him to activate his anti-domain technique and fight Gojo, but with no real time limit on how long the domain will remain up, slashes that don't work due to the Limitless, and red and blue combinations allowing Gojo to really lay on damage, it's only a matter of time until Sukuna is overwhelmed and defeated. In all honesty, this in itself would be enough to confidently square away the threat that is Sukuna, and the only way things could go sideways is if Gojo just refuses to fight intelligently after gaining all of this information, which just wouldn't happen. Simply by learning more about Sukuna's arsenal and understanding the limitations of his curse technique healing, Gojo would be able to formulate strategies that almost assuredly lead to his victory, as long as I'm at his side to, steer him in the right direction. Hell, Even if you allow everything to go as it did up until chapter 235 and just let Gojo know that the next dismantle will hit him, he probably just dodges it and beats Sukuna's injured ass up for a little bit, or hits him with a quick red to finish the job. I hope that you now understand that I focused on a post-Gojo world for a majority of this video for a pretty good reason, as even against Sukuna, with my knowledge to help, Gojo Satoru is kind of a cheat code. And with that, the complete guide to defeating Ryomen Sukuna is officially complete. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and hit the bell. I enjoy this format a lot, so expect many follow-up videos with many different characters, and comment down below some that you'd like to see get put through the ringer. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, that was cool. I like that. I like those two different scenarios, and I like how he covered how Gojo... It's one of those, isn't it? It's like, if I had already seen it and I could just give them the manga, like it's like going back in time and going, "Hey Gojo, here's the manga, so what happens next?" Or, you know, "Boo, here Yuji, boo," and then they figure it out. So yeah, that was fun. I like that. And thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video, or want to be able to watch Patreon-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I ask to push out. Great appreciate for that. Thank you all for watching. You guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys next time.